comments from the audience?
Okay, I'll start.
Yes.
Stacy. Okay. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you guys on the great wonderful Caitlain. I wanted to ask you a question about so street harassment, street culture, street scenarios, and I was intrigued by how you are linking it to the form of capitalism that we now recognize as the way that America goes. This is our form of capitalism. And I was wondering, do you think that before you can get a real grasp on that from capital, that being how street scenarios play out and demonstrate patriarchy, dominance, and so forth, wouldn't it be really necessary to really look at what other kinds of capitalism might work in the United States? Obviously, the kind of capitalism that we're pursuing right now, killing us. And most people don't want to think about changing the capitalist structure or different kinds of capitalism. So my question is, could you envision different kind of capitalism that would sort of ameliorate that whole street scenario?
I think that's a great question. Personally, envisioning a more a healthier form of capitalism. I'm a little bit cynical about capitalism in general. I was thinking about the thing that inherently is harmful structures and visionary structures to sustain itself. But it's definitely something interesting to think about.
Awesome. So my question's for Emma, actually. Your project just made me think about that idea that a lot of the recent sort of, like the sort of mass killings the kind of mass shootings that we have in schools and stuff are like all sort of done by white men. And so how do you sort of see that kind of stuff? Your project's about race and guns and self-defense, and so how do you see the sort of the idea that mass killings are often done by white men, so on and so forth? How does that fit into your project?
That's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it. I think that it's important to note that mass killings are popularly known to be done by white men. However, I think that has to do with the media coverage. And through the research that I've done, it's really inspired me to take this project further and take a media studies approach, because through examining the Black Power movement specifically as one of the time periods that I engaged, I was able to see that who the media is demonizing as a gun owner is really who the gun control is targeting. So during this time period that I talk about, the media is demonizing African American gun owners. However, I think today that the emphasis that the media plays on these white shootings specifically and on a national level is creating gun control legislation that's only targeting white gun owners. And therefore we have legislation that is not actually addressing where most of the deaths are coming from. And so I think that in the future I'll take this and bring a media studies approach to really show what the gun control is missing through the lens of the media.
Steve and then Joe.
Just a quick follow-up on that. That's a great point. Would you, one of the things that has been happening as well lately is the NRA saying that advocates of control are racists. And do you think that this, I mean, I just find it to be such a fabulous media soundbite for the NRA. I don't know what your thoughts on that. It seems to tie with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's pretty humorous. I think that the NRA will use a lot of tactics to further their position, and I think that if we actually engage in the history of the NRA, we see that they're the ones who are implementing racist gun control. especially because they're not acknowledging the gun control that they've supported in the past. And I think that that kind of shows the problem with the way that they're framing their argument.
This question is for Margarita and Stacy, but I guess it's Caitlain too, actually. I was thinking about your presentation, Margarita. I got on the train from down here this morning and I saw there's a new ad campaign on the CTA about sex trafficking and human trafficking. So I guess my question is, how can the broader feminist movement and people who are interested in gender educate specifically about these issues to create a more correct discourse?
That's actually a really good question. I would say that you would just basically want to focus on how would you educate that discourse of feminist theory?
Sorry.
I guess just maybe educate them on statistics as far as who is actually like giving them a background of who the person that they're engaging in commercial sex with is. And a lot of times it is, a lot of times people get into that industry when they're younger and when they're children. So just giving the overall statistics of that a lot of people are involuntarily started when they were underage. All of that I think would be helpful and kind of educate them on that.
Yeah, I've actually seen those advertisements like in demand in Illinois. And I think that that's something that sort of relates particularly to my project because in my research I was looking at some artist activists that were actually feed pasting throughout like city spaces and like street grass passages. And I think that that goes a long way to shift the interaction with public spaces to sort of make the public space a place in which anti-harassment is aware. But I think it also helps with identifying the larger structures that are manifesting these like practices.
This is a question for everybody. Because it was, I don't know if it was because Jafar was leading you all, or you were a team and you were sort of feeding off each other. But there seems to be sort of an implied line in the four presentations of sort of, I'm going to say it wrong because I'm just thinking about it, sort of working all of this outside the law, not illegally, but outside sort of the legislature parameters of how to actually solve these issues. Outside of law, outside of policy, I would even say. And so my question for all of you, and you can do it in order if you want to, I don't really care, is what would be the next step? Joe sort of started talking about education, and that's certainly one of the ways in which you can sort of slowly change structurally the problems. But I'm sort of wondering for all of you,
And I think that with the accessibility of the internet and different kind of news sources through the internet, I think that would be a great way of rewriting media coverage of sensationalized gun violence and perhaps providing more coverage for the non-white cases of gun violence in order to, really bring a broader perspective and hopefully engage conversations that are outside of the polarized debates that we do have in our country. And so I think that that would probably be the direction that I would take.
you don't have to do it in order.
I think particularly for my projects, and I feel I wouldn't be working in like our urban development setting as the world is rapidly urbanizing. It's doing so under the campus to function. There's a high concern with like gender accessibility and like gender-based violence and pregnancy spaces. So planning that out and planning it with knowledge of the context of patriarchal structures, I think is really important.
For sporting institutions, I feel that their practices of gender discrimination themselves kind of act outside of the legislation that is enforced to promote gender equality. So I think that the
first step would be for those institutions to identify that there is gender discrimination and enforce on a stricter level, because there are acts like Title IX, which any college sporting institution receiving federal funding must, provide equal opportunities to women. And then of course there's the Equal Opportunity Employment Act. So I think that those legislative acts need to be enforced on a stricter level by the institutions that would control that.
Any other one thing?
Can I have one person?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that I could easily see myself taking the research that I've gathered from this and taking it into moving it into, just talking about the different ways that nonprofit organizations can continue in that field, like this type of activism work that I feel is good and effective.
Thank you.
Caitlin, I just want to hone in a little bit and come back to Carmela's question with aware, and this is going back to a 14-year-old sister who wants to teach, or who wants to be that head coach teaching men's basketball, coaching men's basketball. So do you envision a class, a policy, any sort of discourse at a middle school, public school level, and any public school level?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure that a policy would necessarily be created for that. I think it's more of, I guess, an underlying thing that people need to identify. And I can relate with your younger sister, because I was that, young coach wanting to coach men. But I think that as intellectuals, I think we need to be able to identify and create awareness of the practices that take place and how they take place at such a young age, and how it becomes part of an athlete's or a coach's upbringing. And I think that would be the first step, and eventually, some kind of policy. Thank you.
And on that note, please join me in congratulating our